Hello world, I'm Whitney Bandel and welcome to another video from my HTML and CSS course. In this video we will be continuing to look at cascading style sheets in padding and margins using the box model. To start off with, we're going to open up Sublime and save a file. Save this to the desktop. And I'm going to save this as boxmodel.html. Go ahead and save that. And then I'll open this up in a browser. You can use your template to fill out the basic information. For the title, we'll call this box model. And we'll go ahead and do our styles as embedded. And we'll go ahead and save that. And again, we'll just write our nodes in the actual code as we go along and just add it to our page. So in the body section, we will create an H1 heading, call this box model. And then let's make an ordered list. We'll start off with the content. So we'll work from the inside out. So when we look at the box model, we're looking at the HTML elements and thinking about how each of them work as an object and how to apply styles to them. So the content itself, let's say we were going to create a paragraph, the content itself would be the text in it. So we're going to go ahead and write text and web page elements. Whoops. And then next we're going to have padding. So this is going to be the white space that is immediately outside of the text. So it shows the background color and adds white space. The border, which is the outline of the element. And then the margin, the space between adjacent elements. Let's take a look at a picture that shows this. So the content itself is the actual element. It could be a paragraph, it could be a heading, it could be an image. The padding is the space that's immediately around it. And then the border can, if it's visible, will be right on the outside of it. And then the margin allows for space between actual items. I like to compare the box model to framing pictures. So in this image, we have a couple of different photographs that have been framed. So in this example, the actual photos themselves would be the elements in this comparison. And then the mats that are around them would be the padding. So that would allow for you to set the background color if there was going to be one. And then the frames would be the border. So you could choose the type of border style that you would have if you would have a border at all. And this would be the outside of the actual element. And then the margin would be like the wall space between these different elements. And at what point would they actually, how close would they actually be? And something that's kind of nice about these pictures is you'll notice that they all have slightly different sizes for the padding and margins, and you can actually specify if you want the top and bottom, left and right, or individual sides to have different padding and margins. So for example, this top image, there is less padding here between the top and the bottom, and then there's quite a bit of space on the left and right. It doesn't look like any of these have completely different padding on each of the sides, but you could do that if you wanted to. And we can look at a couple of examples once we start actually writing our code to see what that would look like. But we could also do the same thing with the margins. For example, when creating margins, you might say that you just want to have maybe, let's just call this 5 pixels. Maybe each side will have 5 pixels of space around it, and because these are close to each other, they happen to have 5 pixels. Maybe this one also has 5 pixels going all the way around it, but to make it look like there's a little bit more space here, maybe this one says that it's going to have 10 pixels on this distance, maybe it only has 5 pixels over here. So there's going to be a combination of everything to actually create your white space. Technically, if you didn't have a border and you didn't have a background color on your elements, what you consider to be the padding and what you consider to be the margin space can be somewhat flexible. So it's going to be up to you to kind of figure out how you want to actually consider those containers of space and how things line up. So let's go back to our code, save this, refresh so we can start seeing everything. And before we start adding some styles, let's add a little bit more content. So after our ordered list, let's create another H1, and we'll call this width and height. And we'll just add a little bit of information. Width and height can be written in pixels, em, or percentages. You can create minimum width or max width. So we'll just save and refresh that. So let's start off by adding some background color. Let's do the body. And let's do background color gray. And then for our headings, let's do background color white. So they'll stand out a little bit. And we can actually see what happens when we work with them. Let's also add a border, and we're just going to start off with solid. So we're going to actually be able to see a solid border now around our headings. Let's add text align center. So they're going to be in the center now. Now let's add some extra text. If you go to week 4 under the resources section, I have a website that says Lipsum, which is a great website for just kind of creating filler text content. So we can choose how many paragraphs or words we might want of lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum is just made up text. It's not a real language at all. It's sort of based off of Latin. But we can just copy some of this. And let's add another paragraph just to the bottom and copy in this text and refresh it. I just want us to have enough text that we can actually resize the window if we wanted and actually see what's going to happen versus what we have written is pretty short and it doesn't really go all the way across the screen. So let's add some styles to our paragraphs as well. And actually we'll do some for our ordered list. Mostly I want us just to see everything within a border so it's easier to tell. So we'll do border dashed. Let's do border dotted. So here we have a couple of different types of borders. This one is going to give us a dotted line. This one will give us a dashed line. Actually, before our width and height, let's create another category. We'll do H1. We'll just type in borders. We can create an unordered list and just have a list of the different types that we can have. So we'll type in none, solid, dotted, dashed, double, groove, ridge, inset, outset, hidden, inherit. And so what we're going to do is go into each of these. This is one of the few times where we'll just go ahead and do an inline style just so we can actually see what each of these are going to look like. Border, dotted. And if I save and refresh, we'll be able to actually see all of these. Style, border, dashed. And inherit, unless we have a style up here with our order list, which actually, we'll keep this. Okay, so unless there's one that's specifically listed for the line items, it should inherit the style. So here we can actually see none. There's not going to be anything around it. Solid will create a solid line. Here we have dotted, dashed, double, so two thin lines, groove. Kind of has a carved in looking edge, so it's three-dimensional. Ridge kind of sticks out. Inset and outset. They essentially kind of create these three-dimensional looking lines where there's a lighter color on one side and a darker color on the other. Hidden and inherit are slightly different too. It's a little hard to see this, so what we can actually do is work now with our padding and our margins. So at the top with style, with our order list, let's do LI, and then say padding. For now, we'll just do 5 pixels. Hit save, refresh. Here things are spaced out a little bit. It's a little easier to see. We'll notice that there's space around the actual text, but these borders are still bumping right up against each other. So what we actually want to do is add a margin as well. Five pixels. And so that gives a little bit more space between each of them. We could maybe even increase this to 10. But you'll notice that it's evenly adding 10, so it's also adding it to the left and right, which we might not want. That might start indenting it too much. So we can actually specify groups that we want. So if you have one number, it means that everything is going to be 5 pixels. The top, right, bottom, and left. And it goes in a clockwise pattern. If we had two numbers, whoops. I always think there should be a comma there, but there shouldn't. If we have two numbers, then the first number will work for the top and bottom, and the second number will work for the right and left. If you have 0, you don't need to specify what the measurement is. We could also do we could write 4 numbers. So what would happen here is the top number would be 5, the right would be 10, bottom would be 15, and then the left would be 20. So going in a clockwise pattern. If you write 3, what's going to happen is the top number is going to be the first number, the left and right will be the same number, and then the bottom is going to be the last number. So you want to pay attention to how many that you're actually going to have. We're going to go with 10 pixels on top and bottom, and 0 on left and right. So we can refresh this. Another thing we could do is for padding and margins, we could write padding left and then specify which option we want. So we could say padding left is going to be 0. We do padding top is going to be 5. Padding right 0, padding bottom 5 pixels, and then we can remove this one here. And I think the padding actually looks better if they're all the same. So I'm going to go ahead and just add 5 pixels to each of these. And then we'll keep margin this way. Let's save, refresh. It's not too bad. Let's try going back to this idea of width and height. Let's play around with this a little bit. So for the headings, let's try working with width. And let's say we want this to be 50%. What's going to happen is now we're going to have our headings actually take up 50% of this space. If we refresh the window size, it'll actually continually increase and decrease size. We could add a minimum width. So we could say we want this to be the case until it's 500 pixels. At a certain point, if it gets much smaller than that, it's just going to be impossible to work with. So that's actually a pretty good dimension. Now it's now stuck over to the left side. So what we want to do is we actually want to add margins. And in order for them to take up the rest of the space, we could say that we want our margins to be a certain percentage, but we can also say auto. And so it will determine what that difference needs to be in order for the margins to take up the rest of the space. So now it's centered again, and it's going to move with the window. And then once it gets to a certain size, it's just not going to get any smaller than that. So it takes a bit of a look at this width and min width. All right. While we're working with our headings, we're going to look at a little bit more of what we can do with the borders. So I'm going to go back to this idea. We have border here with solid. So we're going to work with the border here. We're going to modify it a little bit. So we can say how many pixels wide we want the border to be. We can specify the type of border, so solid. Then we can actually pick a color. So let's see. Let's just type in blue for now. So we have a different color. We could always look up a hexadecimal color that might work better. Right now we're kind of going with monochromatic type look to it. We could also change this if we wanted to. Let's say we want this to be dashed. We could change this. Maybe we want this to be 5 pixels. So as we're changing things, you can see that we're making changes to this border and it's being reflected. Okay, I don't really like how this dash looks, so I'm going to change this back to solid. It's pretty clear and easy to see. It really helps make it stand out. Maybe we would even want to have a different background color maybe instead. Let's see if I can find that list of common colors. Let's see if we can get light sky blue to work. This may or may not work. It just depends on the text editor. It's kind of going with gray blue sort of aesthetic. Another thing we could do with our borders if we really wanted to is we could actually set the border only to be on one side. So we could try this out. How about we take this border for our ordered list. Instead of having border dotted, let's do border bottom and then dotted, and then let's do, actually maybe we only want one side. Let's see how this looks. So this kind of creates this horizontal rule almost going across. We could play around with it. Maybe we want to try something where we have it on two sides. Border right, dotted. Depending on what you're going for, this may or may not kind of suit. Maybe we want to do something more like the top and the bottom. Kind of helps break up this space nicely. Gives a little bit of attention and focus. You do want to think about how you can create visual hierarchies, so this might be a way that we want to kind of contain the information. This down here with width and height looks a little bit sloppy. So I think we should actually go to our paragraph and add some padding here. Let's do 10 pixels. That's going to make it a lot easier to read. Actually, we could be a little more generous. I feel like everyone, when they're starting off with creating designs, they're really hesitant to add in white space, and I feel like you really can go a lot further than you think by just kind of filling in space. Even this right here looks a little bit close to me. I think this would look better if there's a little bit more space around here. So maybe for our H1, we could add just a little bit of padding. Let's do 5 pixels. Yeah, that looks better. We have to scroll a little bit, but it definitely makes it easier to read. It's less overwhelming to look at everything. Alright, so we're going to take a look next at being able to add rounded corners by using border radius. So for our H1, and if you wanted to, we could add this right under border. We're going to go ahead and add it at the very bottom. We're going to type in border radius. And the amount that you add is going to change how rounded of a corner we're going to get. So let's save, refresh. We're going to start with 5. It's barely noticeable. You might see on your own a little better. I'm going to change this to a larger amount. Let's do 30. And here you'll see we have a much more rounded kind of shape. Now it's almost like a pill type shape to it. So this could end up creating a really interesting look. You could choose to have only part of this side. Maybe you only want one corner of it to actually work. So we could do instead, so kind of the same thing here. It's alternating. So we could do 30 pixels and 0. This could end up creating kind of an interesting look. Maybe we want to do something a little more subtle. That kind of creates an interesting form. This might actually look better if we had our border match. So I'm going to change this to light sky blue as well. And in fact, if we were going to do that, we could actually just remove the border if we wanted to. I'm going to just leave it here so we have a reference point to it. But this actually looks kind of nice. The next thing I want us to do, and this is going to relate back to your homework assignments and what you're going to want to do with your midterm, is we're going to create an ID that's going to be called outer wrapper that's going to contain everything in it. So let's start off by placing it in our HTML. So we want our outer wrapper to start right after the body opening tag. So we'll create a div container and we'll call it, we'll give it an ID and we'll call it outer wrapper. You can give it whatever name that you want. You can call it wrapper if you wanted to. You can call it page, it's up to you. And then we're going to end it just before the body section. And then I'm going to add the style above body. So since it's an ID, we're going to do hashtag outer wrapper. I'm going to make sure I spell this the same. And what we're going to do is we're going to work with width again. I'm going to say 75%. And I like to have these line up. So I'm going to do margin, left, auto. You can write these separately if you want. You can also do like we did below where you just have margin set to auto. I believe this is how your textbook does it. So just so you have a little variety and you can see both. So we can save and refresh. So this will also make your whole page. So rather than having to go and say for every single element that you want them to have a certain width and a margin in order for it to be responsive, here you can actually go and apply it to everything within a container and be able to work with everything as kind of a whole page. We could do the same thing too, where we could say that we want there to be a minimum width. Let's do 500 again. That kind of cuts things off to approximately the dimensions of a mobile device. So here we could say, you know, for desktop purposes, we want this to be able to kind of shrink until it gets to maybe about a mobile dimension, and then maybe we have a different set of styles that would kick in. So here we can kind of see everything changing. If we wanted to, we could get rid of the styles for the box model. It's not really a problem. We can leave them as is. Alright, so another one of the styles your textbook is going to take a look at is box shadow. So for the heading, let's go ahead and we'll add box shadow. And then we'll take a look at a couple of different settings. So let's do 5 pixels, 10 pixels, 18 pixels, and then let's type in navy, we'll hit save and refresh. And so now we're going to see a shadow that is going to come down from our heading. The third value is optional and it adds a blur effect to the shadow. So depending on how large that number is, the more it's going to be blurred. So we could change this to 8. And we should see it blur less. We can also change these numbers. And it will change, like here, we can see the second number makes it come down a lot further. Let's do the same thing with the first number. Save, refresh, and it moves off to the right. So this is going to show how much it's going to move over to the right and then down. So we'll just do something kind of subtle, 5 and 10. So we could change how much this is going to blur out. If we wanted to, I think this looks kind of nice and subtle. We could also add a text shadow. So this we could apply to our text directly. Let's again do this on our H1. So we'll type in text shadow. Let's do 2 pixels, 2 pixels, and then we can do a color. Let's do navy. Well, trying to think of something that's going to stand out. Alright, this might look kind of bad. Let's do red. Yeah, that looks awful. But we can see what's happening, at least. I mean, this could be an area where we could go maybe find something a little more subtle that might kind of have a similar effect. If you think of the color wheel, orange and blue are across from each other. So if we picked maybe a slightly brown orange kind of color, it'll still pop from that blue, but it won't look as awful. But you get the point. You can kind of see we can change the size of this. And so we can see how far away those colors are going from the text. So I kind of liked how this was before. Something nice and subtle. So that's going to be box shadow and text shadow. Another property that you can work with is the background clip property. And I'm going to have us take a look at the page from W3 Schools. They have a really good example that shows how this is going to work. So the background clip property defines how far the background should extend within an element. So in this example, the background is going underneath of the border. In this example, we have background, so this is background clip is set to border box. That's the default. Here we have background clip is set to padding box, which means the background color is going to go towards the edge. So here the border actually looks like it's going around. And then here we have background clip is set to content box. So where the content ends is where the background color is going to end. So you can change how things look. Your textbook has a really good example of the background clip property. I don't have access to the online version right at this particular moment, so I can't show you the particular example that I'm thinking of. It's on page 191, and it shows an image, so photo instead, kind of thinking of the same thing where depending on if you wanted the image to actually go underneath of the border or if you wanted it to be butted up against that border, it could end up really changing the look of how you want everything to be framed. So I would suggest looking at that. There's also background size, and there's cover, which retains the aspect ratio, and contain, which stretches to fit. Your assignment will cover these really well to kind of show a difference between these. Since we don't have any images downloaded right now, we'll just take a look real quick at the background size on W3 Schools. Here they have some code examples showing that they're bringing in a background image with the URL. Here they say mountain.jpg. They're saying that they want it to be no repeat. And then here we have background size auto, which is creating a default. The background image is displayed in its original size. Here we have the same image, no repeat, and then we have a particular size. So saying that we want the size to fit only in this pixel dimension. Here the background image is set to 300 pixels and 100 pixels high. Now in the previous videos we've talked before about working with RGB, HSL, and different colors and different ways of looking at color. There is a fourth setting to colors, and that is the alpha channel. That is what sets something to be transparent or not. You will use alpha a lot when you are working with different types of digital media editing. When you're working with opacity, you are going to be picking from a range of 0 to 1. You can kind of think of it as different percentages. So let's actually add, after width and height, we'll scroll down. Before our div, we'll create another H1 heading. We'll call this opacity. And then we'll add a paragraph. And we'll say opacity is set on a scale of 0 to 1. RGBA, all values go from 0 to 255. Alpha goes 0 to 1. And then we'll write in color. So this would be our property. Actually, let's do it undercase lower color. RGBA. So we'll do 255, 255, 255, and then 0.8. So this would be an example. So we would have our color, and then it would be pretty much 80% visible. So it would be somewhat translucent, but we would still be able to see it. Another way that we could write this, we'll just add in this paragraph right after here. We'll say HSLA then we'll say hue 360, saturation 100%, lightness, I'm gonna write this as lightness / brightness. Depending on what you're using, you might encounter brightness as another option. And let's say a photo editor, this will be out of 100% as well. And then opacity. So we could write this kind of similar color, HSLA, pick 0, 100%, 50%, and then we could do again 0.8. So we could go ahead and try one of these. Let's do our background color. We have, instead of light blue, let's do RGBA. I'm just throwing in some values. I'm gonna see what I think of this. It's looking a little weird. That's not too bad. I might go with more blue. Alright, so I think I'm going to settle with this. So RGBA, I'm going to do 100 for the red, 100 for the green, 300 for the blue. So it's going to have way more blue than red and green. And then we're going to do 50% opacity. We could play around with this number and you can kind of see what's going to happen. So if it's a smaller number, we're going to actually see more of the gray from the background show through, and we could actually go to the body background color. We could change this to white so we can see what's happening a little better. Then we could go back to this and see that it's going to be kind of a different color than what we would maybe expect based on this. I actually liked this being gray because of how it blended. So we'll keep this. Next, we're going to take a look at working with gradients. There's two different types of gradients, linear and radial. And let's just keep adding to our notes. So after our paragraph, and it looks like I forgot to end that, we're going to do another H1, and we'll type in gradients. And we'll do a paragraph, and we'll say linear gradient. And then we'll do radial gradient. Now a linear gradient is going to move from, we could add more information, we could say changes color from one side to another. Here we could do changes color from the center moving in an outwards direction. So it would be a circle. So thinking of the radius of a circle and moving from the center of that circle. So we could actually play around with this with the background color. Alright, so we're going to add a gradient. Let's do it to our, essentially our margins. We'll leave the center of this alone. So we're going to go to the body area. And we're going to add in background image. We're going to choose which type. Let's do linear first. Gradient. We're going to say from which direction, so we'll do to bottom. So it'll be from the top. And we'll choose our two colors. Let's do F, 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 and then comma, and then we'll do our another color. Let's do 1E90FF. Save, refresh. So now we have a color going all the way through. We don't have a color in the outer wrapper yet. So I'm going to actually remove this because we don't need this gray anymore. And this is where we could actually add our gray instead to our outer wrapper. So we could do gray, save this, refresh. So then we could have a solid color and then a gradient on the side borders. This is essentially what your homework assignment has you do. I'm not quite sure how I like this gray anymore. We might try something else like white. Just something that's going to stay the same color throughout. And let's add padding to this as well. That's going to look a little better. I noticed that these kind of borders looked like they were getting too close to the edge. It didn't look very good. We could actually even go a little bit further. That looks a lot nicer. Now we can also try out the radial gradient. So why not just do this right underneath? It'll just overwrite the one above it. So we'll type in radial gradient. And this time we don't need to specify which direction because it's implied already. We'll just do our same colors again. So we'll go from FF, 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 which is our white, to our blue color, 1E90FF. Save and refresh. Now, it's really hard to see when you're kind of scrolling through, you'll notice the corners are the darkest, and then towards the center we kind of have more of a hazy look. It might be more obvious if we actually picked a much darker color. Let's try doing navy. Yeah, we can kind of see it a little better. We have kind of this soft center glow in the center, and then it's a lot darker in the corners. I actually kind of like how this looks. Actually matches quite well with what we have for our headings. And then it's a good idea to also add in, after our background gradient, background, repeat, and then just say no repeat. Just for any sort of clarification. Alright, so this kind of covers everything that's going to be in the chapter that's associated with this content. there is a little more that I want us to go over for the sake of your midterm project. I'm going to open up Canvas real quick. So if we kind of look through the midterm requirements real quick, you have the wireframe tags, which is going to mean including header, nav, main, footer, navigation. This is the part we're interested in. Coded as an unordered list. This is something we haven't talked about yet. It's going to be covered in chapter 7, I believe. I'm going to make sure I go over it now so you know how you can do that for your project. Liquid layout, not full width of screen, centered. That's going to be like what we did here, where you are going to create an outer wrapper that is going to be able to be resized. You're going to set the margins to auto, so that way it will flex with your content. You can create a minimum width if you want. Create your sizes in percentages, add your text measurements in ems. For small measurements, use small measurements for padding, borders, margins. Anything larger than that you should do in percentages. I'll be a bit flexible. You can go up to like 20 pixels if you need to. All right, content, links. These are all things that we've covered before. Ordered list, unordered list. You're going to need to have images on each page. Your style sheet should be, everything should be in an external style sheet. Don't include any embedded or inline styles. So everything that we've done, let's say for example in here, I'd actually want to copy this over and put it into a style sheet and then use an external style sheet and link it. Create proper comments. So that's going to be adding, and I actually forgot this. I get so caught up in what I want to do next that I forget. So creating a comment up here, and for your midterm I actually want you to say the subject to. So what the page is. On your style sheet I want you to also add descriptions. So this could be, you can have a comment in here that says text, styles, kind of implying anything below this is all going to be text styles. Maybe up here I'm going to have background, styles, as kind of a comment throughout. So you'd want to do this sort of thing in your style sheet, kind of adding comments to explain what you have. Proper indentation. So that's like what we've been doing with our lists, making sure we indent to make it clear what is being contained in what. Correct spelling and grammar, make sure your HTML and CSS validate, and think of your design. So what's going to be easy to read? Think about what should be a serif font, what should be a sans serif font. Think about your color palette. This didn't end up looking too bad. These colors are all sort of analogous with each other. So this could be an example of a type of color scheme that you could create where everything is going to look pretty good with each other. We could definitely take this a lot further. Our padding and margins have helped a lot with making this easier to read. We would want to go back and change our text here. Everything is just using the defaults. We could change these to all be sans serif fonts. We actually make it a lot bigger. It's a little bit small and hard to read. So think about your design choices. So like I said, the only thing you don't know that we haven't talked about yet is working with the navigation. So we're going to go ahead and add a navigation to the top of this. So above here, we'll just go ahead and add a nav. And like your website will have, we'll create an unordered list. We'll have 4 pages. So let's do link 1, link 2, link 3, link 4. Let's just hit save and refresh. So these are all going to be in an unordered list. Up until now, you've just been creating text. We want to have everything in an unordered list so that way we have that proper structure. So a couple of things that we need to do is add some styles to this ordered list in order to have these styled a little bit different. So let's start with making these into links, even if we don't have the proper links. So we'll do href equals, we'll just say, we'll do midterm1 .html, and we'll call this the home page. Do midterm2.html, do issue, midterm3.html. This will be our credit page. Midterm4, this will be our GCC course page. So I'm going to save this, refresh. So now we have different links instead. So this is everything that we need for the actual HTML. What we want to do next is actually go to our styles and add style items to this. So in order to remove our bullet list items, we're going to want to create nav ul, and we want to create the style and say list style type none. So if we save that and refresh, it's going to get rid of those. Next, we want to put in nav a, and we want to say text decoration none. So this is these are all things that we've kind of looked at, but it's a matter of how we are combining them. So it's going to remove the underlined, so it's not going to look as awkward. And then something kind of new is looking at nav li, and we're going to change the display to inline. And that's going to allow everything to be on the same line. So all of the elements that we've looked at so far, aside from images, have been block displayed, which means everything is going to go all the way across the whole page. And you can't have multiple elements on the same line. If something is displayed as inline, then they can start kind of stacking up as long as there is space within the window. If your window gets to be too small, then it'll move on down and actually be below it. So if you want to have multiple items on the same line, you're going to have to set them to inline. So they'll stack next to each other. So here we could actually go and start playing around a little to make these look a little bit more like actual buttons if we wanted to. Or you could leave them the way that they are now. Maybe we would want to add a general style to our nav. So that way our links are text aligned to the right. We could we could change the size to be a bit larger so they look a little bit more like buttons. Maybe we actually want to add some padding to them, give them a little bit more space. We could add We could add a border to the left. This would kind of create a little line around it. We could actually add a border to the whole button if we wanted to. Maybe make it a little bit thinner. We could even choose a different color. Let's see, I don't remember what, light sky blue? Perhaps. So that way it kind of matches a little bit closer. We could change the text here. Change this. Maybe do black for starters, just so it matches the black on these. We could add a border radius. Maybe not anything too large. Just something to make it a little more interesting. These are actually a little bit close to each other as well. So we might add in a little bit of space. You might even specify it. You know, maybe we don't want to double up on it or even have it on the top and right. Maybe instead we do margin left. So it's just on the one side as it moves out. We can make it look like it's a little bit more of a clickable item by adding a box shadow. So that way we know that they are clickable items. Might tweak this a little to 10 pixels. So it's just kind of a matter of playing around with these items, seeing what you like. What I would probably do next, if this was going to be the site that I was working on, is we have our navigation. So I'd probably actually go in. And this you actually do need to do on your midterm, is use main. So I'd probably add everything below this to a main area. Maybe add a style to the navigation. We could add in margin bottom, maybe 20 pixels. Just kind of push everything down a little bit. This was getting a little bit too close. Then we could also add in main style. Here we could do margin top, 20 pixels. So we have a bit more space there as well. You could do the same thing with your headings. We could add in, after margin auto, we could do margin top, 20 pixels. So little tiny things to just kind of make everything look a little bit nicer. It's going to be kind of up to you how you are going to actually design your page. There's a ton of different possibilities and ways for you to make your site unique. So this is everything we're going to look at for padding and margins and information you need to know before you start working on the midterm. Next time we're going to take a look more at how you can work with layout basics.